When Linda told me to move to the basement, I didn't argue. I simply looked at her, then at my son, and smiled the kind of smile that hides a storm. It wasn't the first time life had asked me to move aside for someone else. But it was the first time it happened inside my own house. My name is David. I'm 68 years old, a retired high school teacher. I've spent most of my life teaching young people how to think before they speak, how to stay calm when anger tempts them to explode. Funny thing is, it's always easier to teach those lessons than to live them. That morning, Linda stood at the doorway of my bedroom with her arms crossed, her voice sharp yet rehearsed. "Dad's coming to stay with us," she said. "He's not well, and he needs comfort. We're giving him your room since it's closer to the bathroom." I blinked once. "My room?" "Yes," she replied, as if it were a small thing. "You can move your things to the basement. It'll be cozier for you, more private." Private. That was her word. Michael stood behind her, silent. My son has my eyes but not my courage. I could see in his face that he didn't agree, but he didn't want to start a fight. I didn't want one either. So I nodded. "If that's what you think is best." Linda smiled faintly, relieved that I didn't resist. "It is. We'll help you move after lunch." And just like that, my life upstairs ended. As I packed my things, I remembered the day I'd built this house, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. I bought it for my late wife, Emily. We raised Michael here, watched him grow, and dreamed of filling this place with laughter long after we were gone. When Emily passed away 5 years ago, the house grew quiet. I gave half of it to Michael when he got married. I wanted him to feel like it was his home too. But somehow, after that conversation, I began to feel like a guest. I moved to the basement that afternoon. Michael helped carry the boxes, his eyes filled with guilt he couldn't put into words. The basement smelled of paint and old wood, not unpleasant, just forgotten. There was a small window near the ceiling, enough to let in a slice of sunlight during the day. "Dad," Michael said quietly as we set down the last box. I didn't know she'd say it like that. "I should have talked to you first." I put a hand on his shoulder. "You're doing your best, son. Don't worry about me. Worry about your marriage. I'll be fine down here." I meant it. At least I thought I did. But nights have a way of making silence louder. When the lights went off upstairs, I lay in bed and stared at the low ceiling. I could hear muffled footsteps, Linda walking to the bathroom, George coughing in what used to be my room. The floor creaked, and I realized something simple and sad: I was a stranger in my own home. Still, I didn't hate her. I didn't hate anyone. I just felt small. Days passed. I spent most of my time reading or tending the little garden outside. Linda rarely came down, and when she did, it was only to drop off a basket of laundry or to remind me to keep things tidy. I obeyed. I always had. But one thing about time: it doesn't forget fairness. It just waits for the right moment to show it. And in my quiet hours downstairs, I began to think about that. Not revenge, I wasn't raised that way. But justice. The kind that doesn't need shouting, only patience. Because I'd learned something in my years as a teacher. People who act cruelly usually believe they'll never need kindness again. A week later, I overheard Linda talking on the phone upstairs. Her voice was sharper than usual. "No, Dad, the doctor said you'll need help walking for a while. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. David's fine in the basement." Her words echoed down the staircase, bouncing off the cold concrete walls like they were meant for me to hear. I smiled again, that same quiet smile. She thought kindness was weakness. She thought silence meant surrender. But silence, when chosen, is power. That night, I made a small decision. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't raise my voice. I'd simply live my life with dignity, the way Emily would have wanted. Because one day, I knew life would speak louder than I ever could. And when it did, Linda would finally understand what she had done, not just to me, but to herself. That was the beginning of everything. It's strange how quickly a house can change its mood. Before Linda's father moved in, this place used to feel alive, sunlight spilling through the curtains, laughter echoing down the hallway. Now, it felt smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves had learned to whisper instead of speak. I tried not to notice. Each morning, I brewed coffee in the kitchen before anyone else woke up. It was the one time of day I could still feel like the house belonged to me. I'd pour my coffee into the same chipped mug I'd used for 20 years, the one Emily gave me, and stand by the window watching the world outside slowly wake. Birds on the fence. The mailman walking his route. A quiet life, still beautiful in its simplicity. But the peace never lasted long. Linda had a way of entering a room and changing its temperature. Not by shouting or arguing, she rarely did either, but by making her presence feel like judgment. Every sound she made was deliberate. The tap of her heels, the clink of a spoon, the sharp closing of a cabinet door. "Good morning," I'd say softly. "Morning," she'd reply, not unkindly, but without warmth. Then she'd start preparing breakfast, usually something light for her and Michael, and a separate tray for her father, George. George was a quiet man too. Older than me by a few years, but not as steady on his feet. I often heard him coughing or calling Linda's name from upstairs. She cared for him well, I'll give her that. But somewhere in the process of being a daughter, she forgot how to be a daughter-in-law. I didn't blame her. People change under pressure. And I suppose in her mind, she was just doing what she thought was right. Still, there were moments that hurt. Like the day I came upstairs to water the plants near the window, plants I'd kept alive since Emily's time. Linda was standing in the living room, holding a set of framed photos. "My photos." "Oh," she said, glancing at me. "I was just decluttering. These were taking up space." I looked at the pictures in her hands, one of Emily and me on our anniversary, another of Michael's graduation. "I can take them," I said gently. She nodded quickly, relieved. "Yes, that's probably best." I carried them downstairs and placed them carefully on the small shelf beside my bed. The basement suddenly felt warmer that day, as if Emily's smile had followed me down. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a quiet rhythm. I kept to myself, tending the small patch of garden behind the house. It became my sanctuary, the only place where no one told me to move or make space for someone else. Neighbors often waved when they passed by. Some would stop and chat for a moment. "Haven't seen you around much, David," one of them said. "You still living here full-time?" I smiled faintly. "Yes. Just keeping busy." I didn't tell them I lived in the basement. Some truths are too small to share. Michael tried, in his own way, to balance things. He'd come downstairs after work, sit on the edge of the old couch, and talk about his day. "Linda's been stressed," he'd say. "Her father's health isn't improving, and she's scared." I nodded. "I understand. Taking care of someone sick isn't easy." He looked at me with quiet gratitude. "You're too kind, Dad. Most people would have fought back." I chuckled softly. "Fighting never changes hearts, son. It only hardens them." Michael smiled, a sad, understanding smile. He'd always admired my patience, though I could tell part of him mistook it for weakness. Maybe he was right. But peace is a choice, not a failure. A few days later, I had an unexpected visitor. Linda's younger sister, Rachel, stopped by with groceries. She was different, warmer, softer. She'd always treated me with respect, ever since the wedding. "Uncle David," she greeted cheerfully, setting the bags down. "I brought some fruit. I figured you'd appreciate something fresh." "That's kind of you," I said. "Thank you." She hesitated for a moment, then looked around. "You're really staying down here?" I smiled. "Seems that way." Her brows furrowed. "That's not right. This is your house." I shook my head slowly. "It's our house. And sometimes peace costs a room." Rachel frowned but said nothing more. Before leaving, she turned to me and whispered, "You've always been the calm one, Uncle David. But just remember, silence can also be a mirror. It shows people who they really are." Her words stayed with me. Weeks turned into months. The air grew colder, and so did the atmosphere upstairs. Linda became more controlling, not cruel but rigid. She managed every detail of the house, from the grocery list to when the heater should run. I often heard her reminding Michael about bills, repairs, or her father's appointments. One night, I heard them arguing. Their voices were muffled, but pain carries clearly through floors. "You're too soft," Linda snapped. "You let your father do whatever he wants." "He's my dad," Michael replied. "He's not doing anything wrong." "It's about respect, Michael. He's not the head of this house anymore. You are. Start acting like it." I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. Arguments like that don't need witnesses. The next morning, she didn't look at me when we crossed paths in the kitchen. "Morning," I said as usual. She gave a short nod and continued stirring her coffee. Her silence said more than words ever could. Despite everything, I made it a point to stay kind. I shoveled snow from the driveway before Michael went to work, fixed the mailbox when it broke, even repaired a loose cabinet handle Linda had been complaining about. She never thanked me directly, but I didn't expect her to. Gratitude isn't something you demand, it's something that arrives quietly, like spring after winter. Sometimes, though, I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. A flicker of guilt, maybe. Or confusion. People often misunderstand kindness when they're used to control. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. George, her father, came down to the basement. Slowly, using his cane, step by step. "Evening," he said in a shaky voice. I stood quickly. "George, you should have called me up. It's not safe for you on those stairs." He waved a hand. "Needed to talk." I pulled out a chair for him, and he sat down, breathing heavily. "Linda means well," he said after a pause. She's just scared. Doesn't want to lose control of things." I nodded. "I know. She doesn't realize how she's treating you," he continued softly. "I told her yesterday, she didn't like hearing it." I smiled gently. "That's all right. Time will teach her what words can't." He looked at me for a long moment. "You're a better man than I am." I chuckled. "No. Just older." He laughed weakly, coughed, then stood to leave. "You'll see, David. Life has a way of balancing itself. It may take time, but it always does." I watched him climb the stairs slowly, his words echoing like a quiet prophecy. That night, I sat by the small window in my basement room, watching snowflakes drift past the glass. The world was silent except for the hum of the furnace. I thought of Emily again, how she used to say, "Kindness is a seed, David. Even when buried, it finds a way to grow." Maybe she was right. Maybe what was happening wasn't punishment, but preparation, a test of patience, of faith in quiet goodness. I didn't know how or when, but something inside me whispered that life wasn't done writing this story yet. The first real snow of the season came early that year. It blanketed the neighborhood in silence, that soft, clean kind of silence that hides everything beneath it. From my small basement window, I watched the flakes fall like tiny secrets from the sky. I used to love winter. Emily and I would sit by the fire, her hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa, the house smelling of cinnamon and old books. Now, the fireplace upstairs was rarely used. Linda said it made the house too stuffy. That morning, I heard voices above, Linda and Michael talking in the kitchen. Their tones were calm but careful, the way people speak when they're walking on ice. "We can't keep paying for 2 heating systems," Linda was saying. "The basement doesn't need to be that warm. He's only down there a few hours a day." "He sleeps there, Linda," Michael replied quietly. "It gets cold at night." "Then he can use extra blankets," she said, her voice clipped. "We have bills to think about." Dad's medicine isn't cheap. I stood by the staircase, listening. Not out of bitterness, just awareness. You learn a lot about people when you listen quietly. Michael didn't answer for a long moment. Then I heard the sound of a chair scraping back. "I'll figure something out," he muttered. Later that evening, he came down carrying a small space heater. "It's not much," he said, plugging it in by my bed. "But it should help at night." I smiled. "Thank you, son. You've always had your mother's heart." He looked at me, guilt flickering behind his eyes. "Dad, maybe I should have said something when she told you to move down here." I shook my head. And what would that have solved? An argument doesn't build peace, it just burns it. He nodded slowly, then sat down beside me. "Sometimes I think you're too calm for this world." I chuckled softly. Or maybe the world's too loud for me. As days turned into weeks, Linda's words began to carry more weight, not just in the house, but in Michael's decisions too. She'd started managing the finances after George's medical bills piled up. Michael trusted her with everything: the bills, the mortgage, even the insurance papers. One afternoon, she came downstairs holding an envelope. "David, these are your utility shares. Since the basement's using extra power now, we thought it'd be fair for you to contribute a little each month." I looked at her, calm as ever. "Of course. How much?" "200 should cover it," she said briskly. I nodded. "I'll transfer it tomorrow." Her tone softened slightly, maybe because I didn't argue. "Thank you. I appreciate your understanding." When she left, I sat for a long while, staring at the envelope. It wasn't the money that hurt. I had enough savings from my teaching years. It was the unspoken message: "You're not family anymore. You're a tenant." Still, I paid it, every month without fail. Because I knew something she didn't. The measure of a person isn't how they treat those who can fight back, but how they treat those who stay silent. George's health worsened in January. The doctors said his lungs were weakening. Linda spent most nights upstairs caring for him, leaving Michael to handle the house. One night, I found Michael sitting in the kitchen long after midnight, head buried in his hands. "Rough day?" I asked quietly. He looked up, startled. "Dad." "Yeah, you could say that. Linda's exhausted, and her father's getting worse. I'm trying to hold everything together." I poured him a cup of tea, Emily's old habit I'd picked up. "Sometimes holding everything together isn't strength, son. It's fear." He frowned. "Fear? Of losing control. Of being blamed. Of admitting that life isn't always fair, and we can't fix everything." He sighed, staring into his tea. "You always make it sound simple." "It is simple," I said. "It's just not easy." The next morning, Linda's tone toward me changed. Not dramatically, just sharper, colder. Maybe she resented that Michael still sought my advice. At breakfast she asked, "David, could you avoid using the main laundry from now on? I'd prefer you use the old washer in the basement." "Of course," I replied. "And please keep your things downstairs. I'm trying to maintain order upstairs, it's getting cluttered." Her voice wasn't cruel, just administrative. Like I was a problem to be managed. Michael looked uncomfortable but said nothing. I smiled faintly. Understood. She left soon after, rushing George to his appointment. Michael exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "She doesn't mean to sound harsh." "I know," I said. "Some people just don't realize how they sound until silence answers them back." He gave me a sad smile. "You always find a way to stay graceful." "Grace isn't a reaction," I said quietly. "It's a decision." Around February, things began to shift in ways none of us expected. George's health declined rapidly. The hospital visits grew frequent, and Linda's mood grew tighter each day. She stopped smiling entirely. Her once perfect hair and neat clothes were replaced by messy buns and hurried sweaters. One evening, I heard her crying in the hallway. I didn't interrupt. Sometimes silence is the only respect you can offer someone's pain. But the next morning, she came downstairs unexpectedly. Her eyes were red, her voice low. "David," she said, "I owe you an apology." I raised my eyebrows, surprised. "I've been unfair," she continued. "I let stress get the better of me. My father's illness, the finances, everything. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did." I looked at her gently. "Linda, you don't owe me an apology. Life gets heavy. We all bend under its weight sometimes." She swallowed hard. "Still, I'm sorry." I smiled. Apology accepted. For a moment, I saw something new in her eyes. Not guilt, but exhaustion mixed with humility. Maybe she was beginning to see. But the peace didn't last. Life rarely lets lessons settle quietly. George passed away a few weeks later. The house felt heavier than ever. Linda's grief came out in strange ways, cleaning constantly, reorganizing everything, snapping at small things. At the funeral, I stood beside her quietly as guests offered condolences. She looked lost, the kind of lost that only comes when you realize no amount of control can stop life from taking what it wants. After the guests left, she sat in the living room, staring at nothing. I approached her slowly. "He was proud of you, Linda." Her voice cracked. "He died in the same room you used to sleep in." I paused, unsure what to say. "I moved you down there," she whispered. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought he needed comfort. But I didn't think about what that meant for you." I shook my head gently. "You did what any daughter would have done." She looked up at me, tears falling freely now. "You're too kind. I don't deserve it." "Maybe not," I said softly. "But kindness isn't about deserving." She sobbed quietly, then left the room. That night, I sat alone in the garden, watching the wind move through the bare trees. Emily used to say that forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it transforms it. Maybe that's what was happening. In the weeks after George's death, life tried to return to normal, but normal had changed. Linda seemed quieter, more introspective. She stopped making harsh comments and began asking how I was. She even brought me tea once, a small gesture, but I noticed. Yet beneath it all, a new kind of distance grew between her and Michael. Arguments became frequent again, this time about money. George had left behind debts from medical expenses, and Linda had used part of their joint savings to settle them. Michael found out through a letter from the bank. "You should have told me," he said one night, his voice carrying down the stairs. "I didn't want to worry you," she replied. "You were already stressed about work." "It's our account, Linda. You can't just..." I closed my book, listening quietly. The silence after the argument was long and heavy. Then I heard footsteps, Michael coming downstairs. He sat on the edge of my bed, looking lost. "Dad, I don't know what's happening to us." "Life," I said. "It's showing you what matters most." He buried his face in his hands. "You should hate her for what she did to you. But you don't." "How?" I thought for a moment. "Because hate is a room with no door, son. Once you enter it, you forget how to leave." He nodded slowly, the truth sinking in. Then, one morning in March, Linda called me upstairs. "David," she said softly, "we're selling the house." I blinked. "Selling?" "Yes. We can't afford the maintenance anymore. It's too big for us." I stayed silent for a moment, processing. The house I'd built, the home I'd loved, gone. "Where will you go?" I asked. "We found a smaller place across town," she said. "It has a basement apartment for you. You'll have your own entrance this time." Her tone was careful, maybe she thought I'd be angry. But I wasn't. "Sounds like a fresh start," I said. She looked at me, searching for resentment and finding none. "You're remarkable, David. I don't know how you stay so calm." I smiled. I've just lived long enough to know that every loss is a teacher. The next few weeks were a blur of packing boxes and signing papers. I helped where I could, but I could feel something deeper happening. Not just a move, but a shift in the air between us. For the first time in months, Linda thanked me. Not once, but often. She started including me in small decisions, furniture, garden plans for the new place. It wasn't much, but it was a bridge. One evening, as we loaded the final boxes, she paused by the stairs. "You know," she said quietly, "this house was always more yours than ours. I hope you know that." I smiled, my heart heavy but full. Homes aren't built from walls, Linda. They're built from how we treat the people inside them. She nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. I'm starting to understand that. When I first moved into that cold basement, I used to think about how small my world had become. One single bed, one chair, one light bulb that flickered whenever it rained. But over time, I realized that the size of a space doesn't define your peace, your thoughts do. I stopped wishing for warmth upstairs. Instead, I started building my own kind of warmth down here. I repaired the old shelves, cleaned the corners, and even brought down my radio from the attic. It became my world, quiet but mine. Every morning, I would wake before sunrise, make a small cup of coffee on my hot plate, and listen to the faint sound of birds outside. Peace comes when you stop asking for it from others. One day, Emily came down unexpectedly. She held a laundry basket and looked around the room as if she was inspecting it. "Dad, you don't need to stay here all day," she said in a voice that sounded half guilty, half proud. "You can come upstairs sometimes, you know, maybe for dinner." I looked at her and smiled gently. "That's kind of you, Emily. But I'm comfortable here." She hesitated. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." I could see it in her eyes, the discomfort of someone trying to silence their conscience. She was still proud of her decision, but she was beginning to feel its weight. A few weeks later, something happened that no one expected. Emily's father, Robert, who had taken my room upstairs, began to have health issues. It started with simple things, forgetting where he left his keys, spilling his tea, losing his balance. Michael was patient at first, but the stress began to show. Emily had to take him to appointments, help him shower, and eventually, she stopped going to work altogether. The house that once echoed with laughter now carried a different silence, the kind that comes with fatigue. One evening, Michael came downstairs. I was reading quietly when I heard his footsteps. "Dad," he began, rubbing his forehead, "I wanted to apologize. About how things have been lately." I looked up calmly. "There's nothing to apologize for, son." He shook his head. "No, there is. You were right. Life has a way of turning things around. Emily's been under pressure. Robert's health is worse, and I think she's realizing how much work it is to take care of someone." I listened without speaking. He looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 2 months. "I just want you to know," he continued, "I appreciate how peaceful you've been through all this. If it were me, I don't think I could have handled it." I smiled softly. "You learn peace when there's nothing left to prove." He didn't reply, but he nodded, the kind of nod that comes from understanding, not agreement. Then he left quietly, and I knew the tides had begun to shift. A few days later, I heard Emily crying in the kitchen. She thought she was alone, but her voice carried down through the vent. She was arguing with Michael, her tone breaking with frustration. "I can't do this anymore, Michael. He forgets everything," he yells, "he doesn't even know who I am sometimes." And Michael, exhausted, replied, "You said he'd stay with us, Emily. You insisted." "I didn't know it would be like this," she cried. "I just thought it was fair. Your dad had the basement, mine could have the room. But I can't. I can't take care of him anymore." There was a long silence after that. Then Michael said quietly, "Fairness isn't about who gets the bigger room, Emily. It's about who gives without expecting something back." I sat there in the basement, listening to the muffled sounds above me. I felt no joy in their struggle, only a deep understanding. Life was teaching her something that my words never could. As months passed, Emily's pride began to soften. She started knocking before coming downstairs, sometimes bringing me small things, a slice of pie or a cup of tea. She didn't say much, but her eyes were quieter now. Less defensive. More reflective. One evening, she sat down across from me. "Dad," she began hesitantly, "I want to say something." I waited. "When I asked you to move down here, I thought I was being practical. I thought it was just about space. But now I see how selfish that was." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't understand what it meant to care for someone until now. I'm sorry." Her voice trembled slightly. It wasn't dramatic, it was genuine. And I could see how much it cost her to say those words. I nodded slowly. "Sometimes life teaches us through mirrors, Emily. We see our actions reflected back at us, just not immediately." She smiled faintly through teary eyes. "I guess I had to live it to understand it." "That's how wisdom works," I said. "It rarely comes wrapped in comfort." From that day on, things began to change quietly. Michael started coming downstairs more often. We'd talk about small things, gardening, the weather, old memories. Sometimes, he'd just sit silently beside me, and that was enough. Robert's condition worsened, and after a while, Emily decided to move him to a care home nearby. She visited him every day for a while, but as time went on, she started spending more time downstairs with me. One evening, she helped me tidy up the basement. She picked up an old photograph of my late wife, Linda. "You loved her a lot, didn't you?" she asked softly. I looked at the photo, her gentle smile frozen in time. "Yes. And I still do." Emily's voice was quiet. "She must have been proud of you." I chuckled lightly. She always said I had more patience than sense. Emily laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, for the first time in months. It felt like a fragile bridge being rebuilt between us. Months turned into a year. The basement became warmer, both literally and emotionally. Emily would sometimes bring her laptop down and sit near me while working. Michael fixed the old heater for me himself. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, it simply found balance again. Then one day, something unexpected happened. Robert passed away peacefully in his sleep. The house fell silent again, but this time, the silence was shared, not isolated. Emily was broken, but she handled it with grace. And when we returned from the small memorial service, she walked into my basement and sat down quietly. After a long pause, she whispered, "You must have felt this kind of pain before." I nodded. "Yes. When I lost Linda. But pain changes form over time. It becomes softer if you let it." She wiped her tears. "I think I understand that now." I placed my hand gently over hers. "You do, Emily. You've learned what no one can teach, the difference between comfort and compassion." A few months later, Emily and Michael decided to renovate the house. One morning, Emily came downstairs with a quiet smile. "Dad," she said, "we've been thinking, we want you to move back upstairs. Your old room is ready." I looked at her kindly. "Thank you, Emily. But I think I'll stay here." Her eyes widened. "You'd rather stay in the basement?" I smiled softly. "It's not a basement anymore. It's my home within a home. And sometimes, peace is best left where it finally settled." She nodded slowly, understanding more than words could express. That night, I sat on my small bed and thought about how far we'd come, not as a family defined by roles, but as people reshaped by life's quiet lessons. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't raise my voice or prove a point. I simply let time and truth do their work. And in doing so, I learned something powerful. Sometimes, the most profound revenge is silent transformation. The days after Robert's passing were slow and heavy, the kind that seemed to stretch longer than usual. The house, once filled with distant tension, had grown silent, not the cold silence of resentment, but the reflective kind that follows realization. Emily spent most mornings in the kitchen, making tea for 3 instead of 4, and every time she poured that third cup, her eyes softened, as if the empty chair reminded her not only of her father's absence, but of her own past choices. I didn't bring up the past. There was no need to. Life had already done the talking for me. Instead, I focused on what was ahead, the gentle rebuilding of a family that had broken, not through malice, but through misunderstanding. One Sunday morning, Michael came down to the basement while I was polishing an old wooden chair I'd found at a garage sale. "Dad," he said with a faint smile, "Emily and I were thinking, we should do something for you. Maybe a small garden outside, the kind you used to have when we were kids." I looked up from my chair and smiled. "That would be nice." He nodded. "We'll start this weekend." Emily already picked out the seeds. She said it was your favorite thing, to see something grow slowly, patiently. I chuckled. She's right. Things that grow slow last the longest. That weekend, we started working together. Michael cleared the old patch of soil near the porch, and Emily brought small pots, gloves, and seed packets, marigolds, roses, and even a few herbs. It was a small project, but it brought an unexpected lightness to the house. As I watched them working side by side, I felt something shift inside me, the kind of peace that comes not from winning, but from healing. At one point, Emily looked up from planting and said, "Dad, I didn't realize how much I missed doing this with you." I smiled. That's the thing about good memories. They wait quietly for us to come back. She paused and nodded. "You always say things that make silence feel full." I laughed softly. Maybe that's because silence was my best teacher. Over the next few months, our home changed. Not through grand gestures, but through small consistencies, shared dinners, honest conversations, unspoken gratitude. Emily had softened. Her tone was gentle, her step slower, her heart open. She began volunteering at a nearby care center once a week, to help the elderly, she said, and to understand them better. One evening, after returning home, she came down to my basement with a cup of tea. "I met someone at the center today," she began. "An old man who reminded me of you. He said something I can't forget." I smiled. "What did he say?" "He told me, 'Daughter, you don't learn love by being loved. You learn it by realizing when you failed to give it.'" I looked at her for a long moment. "He's a wise man." She nodded, her voice low. "I think I understand now what you felt when I asked you to move here. It wasn't just about losing space. It was about losing place." Her words were honest. Painfully honest. And in that honesty, I found peace. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of pain or regret, but because of gratitude. You see, revenge, at least the kind people talk about, usually ends when the other person suffers. But this was different. This was a kind of justice that healed instead of hurt. Emily had changed. Not because I demanded it, but because she finally saw what kindness looks like in the mirror of time. And that, I realized, was the true victory. A few weeks later, Michael was promoted at work. He invited Emily and me to a small dinner at a local restaurant to celebrate. It was a quiet place, soft music, warm lighting, the kind where you can hear your thoughts without shouting over noise. As we sat there, Emily raised her glass and said, "To Dad. For teaching us patience, even when we didn't deserve it." I looked at her, touched. "You didn't need teaching," I said softly. "You just needed time." Michael added with a smile, "Time, and a good man to remind us what really matters." I smiled back. "What matters, Michael, is that love doesn't stop just because respect did. It waits. It forgives. And if you're lucky, it returns." A few months passed peacefully. The garden flourished. The marigolds grew taller than I expected, their bright orange petals glowing under the morning sun. Emily would often take her coffee outside and sit among the flowers. Sometimes I'd join her, and we'd sit in comfortable silence, listening to the sound of birds. One morning, she looked at me and said, "I was wrong about what a home means. It's not about who gets which room. It's about who feels safe enough to stay." I nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction. "You've learned something most people spend a lifetime chasing." She smiled. "Maybe I had to lose my peace to learn how to protect it." Then one evening, while we were having dinner, Emily looked at me and said, "Dad, we've been talking. We want you to move upstairs. But not into your old room." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh." She smiled gently. "We want to build you your own space. A study with big windows, bookshelves, a chair you can sit in by the window. Not a basement. A place you deserve." I looked at her, deeply moved. "That's very kind of you, Emily. But why now?" She took a breath and said, "Because I finally understand what it means to honor someone. I can't change what I did before, but I can do better now." Her words were soft, but they carried the weight of truth. The new study was finished 2 months later. They cleared the old storage room upstairs, painted it pale beige, and filled it with books, a new desk, and a comfortable armchair. The first time I stepped in, I felt something shift inside me, not pride, not triumph, but closure. Emily stood beside me, smiling. "Do you like it?" I looked around slowly. "It's beautiful, Emily. Thank you." She hesitated, then said, "You taught me something, Dad. Revenge doesn't always mean making someone pay. Sometimes it means letting them see what they lost when they stopped listening." I turned to her with a calm smile. "And forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without the pain." She nodded, her eyes glistening. I think both of us learned the same lesson, just in different ways. That night, I sat in my new chair by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. I thought about everything that had happened, the move to the basement, the loneliness, the quiet patience, and the soft unraveling of pride into love. Revenge never crossed my lips. But it lived quietly in my patience. It grew in my silence. It matured into something wiser, justice wrapped in peace. Emily never apologized with grand gestures or tears. She did it through change, through care, through small acts that spoke louder than words ever could. And that, I realized, was the only revenge worth taking. The kind that heals the soul, not breaks another. As the evening deepened, Michael came into the room and looked around. "Feels right, doesn't it?" he said. I smiled. "It does. Everything's where it should be." He leaned against the doorway. "You know, Emily's been reading those self-help books lately. I think she's trying to forgive herself." I chuckled. "Forgiving yourself is harder than forgiving others. But she'll get there." He nodded. "You always believed in her, didn't you?" "I believed in time," I said simply. "And time believed in her." Months later, when spring arrived, the garden bloomed brighter than ever. Every petal seemed to carry a story, of loss, growth, and quiet redemption. Emily often stood by the window, looking at it with a soft smile. Sometimes she'd whisper, almost to herself, "I still can't believe I once made you live down there." And I would answer gently, "If you hadn't, we wouldn't have learned this piece." I don't know when exactly I forgave her. Maybe it was the first time she brought me tea without words. Maybe it was the day she started calling me Dad again, with warmth. Or maybe it was when she built me this room. All I know is that forgiveness doesn't announce itself. It settles quietly, like evening light. And as I sat there that night, listening to the soft hum of life upstairs, I felt nothing but gratitude. Because life, in its own quiet way, had given me back everything I lost. Not through anger, but through grace. I often sit by the window these days. The air feels different, lighter, almost forgiving. Morning light drifts through the curtains, touching everything with warmth, and I can hear the faint laughter of Emily and Michael from the kitchen upstairs. It's strange how peaceful this house feels now, compared to the storm of pride and misunderstanding that once lived here. It's not that the past has vanished, it hasn't. But the pain has softened. It has turned into memory, and memory. Memory is harmless when you stop feeding it with bitterness. Sometimes I look at this house and think about the seasons it's witnessed: love, resentment, loss, and now, reconciliation. I used to think revenge meant balance, making someone see what they did wrong. But over time, I learned something gentler, wiser. Revenge is not about making others suffer. It's about letting them see that you can still grow, still smile, still love, even after what they did. One evening, Emily brought me an old photo album. "I found this in one of the boxes," she said. "Thought you might want to look at it." I opened it, and there she was, Linda, my wife, smiling as if time had never touched her. Emily sat beside me quietly, her head resting slightly near my shoulder. We turned the pages together, one memory after another. "Mom was beautiful," Emily said softly.
"She was," I replied.
"And she had a way of making peace even in arguments. She used to say, 'Kindness is not weakness, David. It's choosing not to let others change your nature.'" Emily looked up at me, her eyes thoughtful. "You lived that, didn't you? When I made you move downstairs, you didn't change." I smiled faintly. Maybe I did change. I just changed quietly. She looked away for a moment, and then whispered, "I don't think I've ever respected someone as much as I respect you now." Her words warmed something deep inside me. They weren't spoken out of guilt anymore, but from understanding. Sometimes, late at night, I walk down to the basement, my old room. I don't go there to relive the pain, but to remind myself how far we've come. The space is clean and empty now, except for a single chair and a folded blanket I left behind. It feels smaller than I remember. Or maybe I've simply grown larger inside. Standing there, I realize something that took me a lifetime to understand. People often hurt others not out of evil, but out of blindness. Emily wasn't cruel, she was simply unaware. And life, in its patient way, opened her eyes. That realization freed me completely. One afternoon, as I sat in my new study, Emily came in holding a letter. "Dad," she said, "I got a message from the care center. They want to name their new wing after Robert. For his memory." I nodded gently. "That's nice. He'd be happy to know his name will bring comfort to others." She smiled, then hesitated. "They asked if I'd like to volunteer more often." I said yes. "I want to keep helping people, especially those who remind me of what I once took for granted." I reached out and placed my hand over hers. "That's how redemption begins, Emily. Not in words, but in action." Her eyes softened. "You've forgiven me, haven't you?" I smiled, a deep, calm smile. "A long time ago. I just waited for you to forgive yourself." She didn't reply, but her eyes glistened. And in that silence, there was more love than any sentence could ever carry. The following spring, our garden bloomed brighter than ever. Birds returned to build nests among the marigolds, and the scent of fresh soil filled the air each morning. Michael added a small bench under the oak tree and said, "Dad, this is your spot." So now, every morning, I sit there with my coffee and listen to the quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, but full of peace. Sometimes, I see Emily tending the flowers. She moves slowly, thoughtfully, and every now and then, she looks up at me with a smile that says more than any apology could. And I smile back, thinking, this is what patience builds. Not revenge, but renewal. You see, when you let go of anger, life finds its own way to settle the score. It doesn't need your help. It just needs your faith. If I had shouted that day, if I had demanded my place, forced her to understand, maybe we'd still be strangers living under the same roof. But silence spoke louder than anger ever could. It taught her. And it healed me. That's the balance of life. Sometimes you win not by fighting, but by staying kind when others forget how to be. A few months ago, Emily gave me a framed quote for my birthday. It sits on my desk now, beside Linda's photograph. It says, "Peace is not something you find, It's something you grow, quietly, one act of grace at a time. When I read it, I smiled. Because it wasn't a gift, it was her confession, her way of saying she understood everything I had tried to teach without words. I don't know how many more springs I'll see. Age, after all, doesn't promise anything. But I do know this: when my time comes, I'll go with a heart that has no grudges left, no bitterness stored away. Because I've seen what forgiveness can do. I've seen pride turn into humility, and guilt turn into compassion. And if I had to live it all over again, the betrayal, the cold basement, the loneliness, I would. Because that journey, painful as it was, led us all to this peace. As I sit here now, watching the light fade across the garden, I think about Linda's words again. Kindness isn't weakness.
She was right. It never was.
It was the quiet revenge that turned a broken family into a whole one again. And sometimes, silence is not what ends the story. It's what saves it.